There are dreams that visit us gently at night, and then there are dreams that stand at the foot of our beds, shaking us awake. These are not fantasies born of comfort, but visions born of injustice. They refuse to sleep because suffering does not rest. They refuse to sleep because freedom delayed is freedom denied. And as long as inequality breathes, these dreams will keep calling us, demanding not silence, but action. Dreams are often misunderstood as quiet hopes we carry in our hearts, fragile and optional, something to admire but not necessarily pursue. Yet true dreams, the kind that shape history and awaken societies, are not gentle wishes waiting to be fulfilled by chance. They are moral obligations that demand courage, sacrifice, and responsibility. A wish asks for comfort. A moral obligation calls for action. When a dream is rooted in justice, equality, and human dignity, it stops being personal and becomes a shared duty that weighs on the conscience of everyone who recognizes it. A wish can be abandoned without guilt, but a dream tied to morality cannot be ignored without consequence. To dream of a world without racism, poverty, or violence is not merely to imagine a better future. It is to acknowledge that the present reality is unacceptable. Once that acknowledgement exists, neutrality becomes impossible. Seeing injustice and choosing not to act transforms silence into complicity. Moral dreams expose the gap between what is and what ought to be, and that gap creates responsibility. They urge individuals and communities to move beyond sympathy toward commitment. Dreams as moral obligations also challenge comfort. Wishes fit neatly into safe lives, requiring little effort beyond optimism. Moral dreams, however, disturb peace and unsettle routines. They require people to confront systems of oppression, question long-held beliefs, and sometimes stand alone against popular opinion. These dreams ask not whether change is convenient, but whether it is right. They measure success not by personal gain, but by collective progress, especially for those who have been pushed to the margins of society. History shows that progress has never been achieved by wishful thinking alone. Every significant movement for justice was driven by people who understood that dreaming carried a cost. Abolitionists, civil rights activists, and freedom fighters did not simply hope for change. They felt morally bound to pursue it. Their dreams demanded marches instead of murmurs, sacrifice instead of comfort, and persistence instead of patience. These dreams refused to remain abstract ideas and instead took shape through laws challenged, voices raised, and lives risked. When dreams are treated as obligations, they become powerful forces that shape behavior. They influence how people vote, how they educate their children, how they treat strangers, and how they respond to injustice in daily life. A moral dream does not wait for perfect conditions or ideal leaders. It begins wherever conscience meets opportunity, even in small acts of courage and consistency. It lives in classrooms that teach truth, in communities that protect the vulnerable, and in individuals who refuse to accept injustice as normal. To carry such a dream is to accept that responsibility does not end with belief. Belief is only the beginning. Action is the proof that the dream is alive, and sacrifice is the evidence that it is taken seriously. Moral dreams insist that progress is not someone else's job, that the burden of change belongs to all who benefit from hope and justice and freedom and dignity and humanity. Injustice does not exist quietly or without consequence. It disrupts the flow of time and forces societies to confront realities they would rather ignore. Like an alarm clock in the early hours of the morning, injustice shocks humanity out of comfort and complacency. It announces that something is wrong, that the promise of progress has been broken, and that the moral order has been disturbed. History does not move forward simply because time passes. It moves forward because injustice demands correction and refuses to be silenced. Every era marked as a turning point is rooted in injustice that could no longer be endured. Slavery, colonialism, segregation, and economic exploitation were not merely social flaws, they were alarms ringing across generations. These injustices exposed the contradictions between declared values and lived realities. Nations that spoke of freedom while denying it to millions were forced to confront their hypocrisy. The pain of the oppressed became the signal that history could not continue on its current path without moral collapse. Injustice awakens those who are affected directly, but it also challenges those who benefit indirectly. For the oppressed, injustice is a daily reality that shapes survival and resistance. For the comfortable, it is often easier to ignore the alarm, to press the snooze button and return to sleep. Yet history shows that ignoring injustice does not silence it. The longer it is ignored, the louder and more destructive it becomes. Social unrest, protest movements, and revolutions often arise not from sudden anger, but from long-standing injustice that has been repeatedly dismissed. The alarm clock of injustice also reveals the urgency of action. It reminds societies that delay carries a cost. Justice postponed deepens wounds and hardens divisions. Each moment of inaction allows inequality to become normalized and suffering to multiply. History remembers not only the cruelty of oppressors, but also the hesitation of those who knew better and chose to wait. Injustice transforms waiting into wrongdoing and patience into permission for harm. This alarm does more than warn. It calls people to responsibility. It forces moral choices upon individuals, institutions, and governments. Once injustice is recognized, ignorance is no longer an excuse. People must decide whether they will respond with courage or retreat into denial. Laws, customs, and traditions that once seemed unchangeable are questioned when injustice exposes their cruelty. The alarm disrupts the illusion that stability is more valuable than justice. Injustice also shapes the legacy of generations. Those who respond to it with action become architects of progress, while those who ignore it are remembered as obstacles to change. History honors voices that spoke when silence was safer and actions that challenged systems when obedience was easier. Each struggle for justice becomes a chapter written by those who refuse to sleep through the ringing alarm. The alarm clock of history does not ring once and disappear. It continues to sound as long as inequality exists. Its purpose is not to punish, but to awaken, not to destroy, but to transform. It calls humanity to rise, to face uncomfortable truths, and to move toward a future where justice is not an exception but a foundation, where dignity is protected not by chance but by choice, and where history is shaped not by suffering endured but by injustice confronted and challenged and answered through collective courage and moral awakening. Silence often disguises itself as neutrality, but in the struggle for justice and equality, it becomes a powerful force against progress. When dreams of freedom and dignity arise, they depend on voices willing to speak truth and challenge wrongdoing. Silence allows injustice to breathe, to settle into everyday life, and to present itself as normal. Dreams are sustained by courage, and silence slowly drains that courage until hope becomes fragile and easily dismissed. In moments of injustice, silence is rarely empty. It communicates acceptance, comfort, or fear, and each of these strengthens the very systems that dreams seek to dismantle. When people witness discrimination, cruelty, or inequality and choose not to respond, they send a message that such actions can continue without consequence. The absence of protest becomes permission. Dreams that call for fairness and humanity are weakened not only by open opposition, but also by the quiet refusal to engage. History demonstrates that silence has often stood beside oppression. Many of the greatest injustices endured for generations, not because they lacked critics, but because too many people chose safety over truth. Silence protected reputations, preserved privilege, and maintained order at the cost of human suffering. While a dream of justice may begin in the hearts of a few, it requires public expression to survive. Without voices, dreams remain isolated thoughts rather than movements capable of change. Silence also distorts responsibility. It creates the illusion that injustice is someone else's problem, best handled by leaders, institutions, or future generations. This detachment allows individuals to feel morally clean while benefiting from unfair systems. Dreams demand shared responsibility, but silence fragments that responsibility until no one feels accountable. In this way, silence does not merely ignore the dream, it actively undermines it by removing the collective effort required to sustain it. The enemy nature of silence is especially visible in moments of crisis. When fear dominates, silence becomes tempting because speaking carries risk. Yet every major transformation in history required people to speak when it was dangerous, unpopular, or costly. Dreams grow stronger when voices rise together, but they weaken when fear isolates those voices. Silence convinces individuals that they are alone, even when many share the same hope. Breaking silence does not always require grand speeches or dramatic gestures. It begins with acknowledging injustice, questioning unfairness, and refusing to pretend that suffering is invisible. Words spoken in classrooms, workplaces, homes, and public spaces form the foundation of broader change. Dreams rely on conversation as much as action because awareness precedes transformation. When silence is broken, truth gains space to breathe and grow. Silence ultimately threatens the future of the dream because it erases urgency. Without voices to remind society of injustice, time dulls moral outrage and replaces it with indifference. Dreams that once burned brightly fade into distant ideals rather than living demands. To protect the dream is to refuse silence, to choose expression over comfort, and to understand that every voice matters in shaping a more just world where dreams survive not through quiet hope, but through spoken truth and shared resolve and persistent courage and unwavering commitment. Nonviolence is often mistaken for weakness, passivity, or surrender, yet history reveals it as one of the most powerful forces for lasting change. It is not the absence of resistance, but a deliberate and disciplined form of struggle that confronts injustice without destroying humanity. Nonviolence challenges oppression while preserving moral integrity, proving that strength is not measured by the ability to harm, but by the ability to endure, resist, and transform. At its core, nonviolence recognizes that violence may win temporary victories, but rarely wins justice. Force can silence voices, but it cannot silence truth. Nonviolent action exposes injustice in ways that violence cannot, because it removes the excuse of retaliation and reveals the imbalance of power and morality. When peaceful protesters are met with brutality, the injustice becomes visible not only to those who suffer, but to the wider world, awakening conscience and accountability. Nonviolence also protects the soul of a movement. Violence hardens hearts, deepens hatred, and creates cycles of revenge that last for generations. Nonviolent resistance, by contrast, seeks to defeat injustice without defeating people. It separates the wrong from the wrongdoer and leaves space for redemption and reconciliation. This approach ensures that victory does not come at the cost of becoming what one opposes. The goal is not domination, but transformation. As a force, nonviolence requires immense courage and discipline. It demands restraint in the face of provocation and faith in justice when results are not immediate. Choosing nonviolence means standing firm without striking back, speaking truth without cruelty, and resisting fear without surrendering dignity. This discipline transforms ordinary individuals into powerful agents of change, proving that moral courage can be stronger than physical force. Nonviolence also has the power to unite rather than divide. Violent movements often fracture communities and alienate potential allies, while nonviolent movements invite participation across differences of race, class, religion, and ideology. Because nonviolence appeals to shared human values, it builds coalitions that strengthen the cause and sustain momentum. It creates a space where justice can be pursued collectively rather than imposed through fear. Throughout history, nonviolence has reshaped nations and challenged empires. Its success lies not in speed, but in durability. Changes achieved through violence may collapse once force is removed, but changes rooted in moral conviction endure because they alter beliefs as well as laws. Nonviolence reshapes public consciousness, turning once accepted injustices into moral failures that society can no longer defend. Nonviolence also speaks to the future. It teaches generations that power does not require cruelty and that resistance does not require hatred. By choosing nonviolence, movements plant the seeds of peace even while confronting injustice. This ensures that the society built after change reflects the values that inspired the struggle. Nonviolence becomes not only a method but a message, declaring that justice achieved without bloodshed honors life, dignity, and humanity, while proving that the strongest force in history is the courage to love justice more than the desire to destroy, and to resist without hatred, and to stand firm without violence. Unity across difference is the recognition that progress is impossible when humanity is divided by fear, prejudice, and misunderstanding. Differences in race, culture, religion, language, and background are often treated as barriers, yet they are the very elements that give society depth and strength. Unity does not require sameness. It requires the willingness to stand together despite disagreement and diversity. When people learn to value one another beyond labels, collective power replaces isolation. History reveals that injustice thrives on division. Systems of oppression rely on separating people into categories, convincing them that their struggles are unrelated or that one group's advancement threatens another's survival. Unity across difference dismantles this strategy by exposing shared humanity. When individuals recognize that dignity and justice are not limited resources, cooperation becomes possible. The fight for equality becomes broader, stronger, and more resilient when it includes many voices rather than a single narrative. Unity also demands empathy, the ability to listen to experiences that differ from one's own without defensiveness or denial. Empathy transforms abstract ideas about justice into personal responsibility. It encourages people to see the pain of others not as distant stories but as interconnected realities. Through listening, misconceptions are challenged and trust is built. Unity grows when people acknowledge that understanding does not require agreement, only respect and openness. Across differences, unity requires courage. It is easier to remain within familiar communities where beliefs go unchallenged and comfort is preserved. Stepping into unity means confronting bias, unlearning inherited prejudice, and sometimes challenging one's own community. This courage strengthens movements because it prioritizes justice over loyalty to division. It asks individuals to choose the common good over personal comfort and long-standing assumptions. Unity across difference also expands the vision of progress. When diverse groups come together, solutions become more creative and inclusive. Different perspectives highlight injustices that might otherwise remain invisible. Policies, movements, and social changes shaped by unity are more likely to serve the whole of society rather than a privileged few. Unity ensures that progress does not leave anyone behind or silence marginalized voices. This form of unity does not erase conflict. Disagreements remain, but they are approached with respect rather than hostility. Unity allows conflict to become constructive rather than destructive. It creates space for dialogue, growth, and compromise without sacrificing core principles. Through unity, differences become sources of learning instead of reasons for division. The strength of unity across difference lies in its ability to turn shared values into collective action. When people unite around justice, freedom, and dignity, their combined efforts challenge systems that no single group could confront alone. Unity transforms scattered struggles into a powerful movement capable of reshaping society. It reminds humanity that no one is truly free until all are free, and that the dream of justice survives only when people choose to walk together across lines that once separated them and toward a future built on mutual respect and shared responsibility and enduring solidarity. Hope that marches forward is not a fragile emotion or a passive feeling of optimism. It is a determined force that refuses to stand still in the face of hardship. It is the kind of hope born from struggle, shaped by disappointment and strengthened by perseverance. This hope does not wait for perfect conditions or guaranteed success. It moves despite uncertainty, carrying the belief that progress is possible even when the present feels overwhelming. Unlike wishful thinking, marching hope is active. It walks hand in hand with effort, sacrifice, and resilience. It understands that change is rarely sudden and never easy. Each step forward is often met with resistance, setbacks, and moments of exhaustion, yet hope continues because stopping would mean surrendering the future. This form of hope draws its power from action, from showing up again and again even when results are not immediate. Hope that marches forward is deeply connected to memory. It remembers past victories achieved through persistence and lessons learned through failure. It honors those who struggled before, recognizing that the freedoms enjoyed today were once distant dreams. By remembering history, hope gains direction and purpose. It learns that progress is not linear but cumulative, built through countless acts of courage and endurance. This hope also thrives in community. While it may begin in individual hearts, it grows stronger when shared. Marching together transforms loneliness into solidarity and fear into collective strength. When people walk side by side, hope becomes visible and contagious. It turns private belief into public movement and isolated courage into unstoppable momentum. Shared hope creates accountability, ensuring that no one carries the burden of change alone. Hope that marches forward does not deny pain or injustice. It looks directly at suffering and still chooses to move. It understands that acknowledging reality is not the same as accepting it. This hope refuses to normalize injustice or become numb to inequality. Instead, it uses discomfort as fuel, turning frustration into determination and sorrow into purpose. In times of defeat, this hope adapts rather than disappears. It learns to change strategies without abandoning principles. It bends without breaking, understanding that resilience is rooted in flexibility. When doors close, hope searches for new paths forward, guided by the belief that justice is worth pursuing in any form. It survives because it is grounded not in outcomes but in values. Hope that marches forward shapes the future by insisting on movement. It refuses to let despair dictate direction or fear determine destiny. It understands that every step, no matter how small, contributes to a larger journey. This hope is not loud optimism, but steady commitment, not blind faith, but courageous persistence. It walks through uncertainty with purpose, carrying the conviction that progress is made by those who continue moving forward, who refuse to retreat into cynicism, and who believe that the act of marching itself becomes a declaration that change is possible and dignity is worth pursuing, and the future is shaped by those who keep walking. So let us leave this moment not merely inspired, but committed. Let us carry dreams that refuse to sleep, speak when silence is easiest, stand firm without violence, and walk together across every difference. Let hope continue to march forward through our choices, our courage, and our compassion. The future will not be shaped by those who wait for justice, but by those who rise to meet it, who turn dreams into duty, and who understand that history moves forward when ordinary people choose to do extraordinary good together.